Welcome to the second episode of the CHD podcast. I'm very excited to introduce my new co-host, Camiecia Anthony. Camiecia is an amazing heart warrior and mother. She'll be producing today's show with a terrific trio of Scoggins. Today, I'll be talking with Heidi, Victoria, and Rita Scoggins. And when I'm done with the interview, Camiecia and I will have a chance to talk about what she thought about the show and what surprised her most. Sit back and enjoy the second episode of the CHD podcast. Welcome to the CHD podcast. I'm so excited to have you here for our second episode. And we're going to start today's show, which is for Heart Month 2023, Taking Control of Your Heart. And I have three guests with me here today. One of my guests is the granddaughter of a dear friend of mine who I've known almost forever. And I am so excited because this is my first time to actually talk to Heidi. So I'm starting with you, Heidi Scoggins. And I would like for you to tell me when your congenital heart defect was discovered and the name of your heart defect.
So I have PVR with an ASD, and it was only found about a year and a half ago. I had just turned 18, and I was starting to see a cardiologist. And I got my first patch like a month after my 18th birthday.
This just amazes me that you made it to age 18. And how was it that you knew that you needed to see a cardiologist?
I had gone to the doctor for something completely different, and I'm in nursing school now. And I just recently learned one of the follow-up questions that nurses need to ask is a system like going through old carts is what it's called. And basically it's just asking, do you have any other symptoms related to this problem? And my response was, sometimes it feels like my heart is catching up. And so she was like, I'll send a note to the cardiologist. And I said, okay, that's fine. And I let my mom know, hey, they're going to send me to a cardiologist. They think it's a murmur. They just need to make sure it's benign. And then that just domino effect all the way down. And then I had open heart surgery like 2 months later.
Oh my gosh, that must have been scary. You already knew that you had an aunt who had heart surgery. Did you ever think that was going to happen to you, Heidi?
Absolutely not. No way.
Oh my goodness. I remember when your grandmother posted about it on Facebook, and I was totally in shock. I said, what? Not Heidi. We thought all of you grandkids were just fine. But that was not the case. And we'll get into your surgery a little bit further in the show. Next, I'd like to welcome Victoria. Welcome to my new podcast, Victoria. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
I'm happy to be here.
I never thought I would have you and your niece and your mother on a show talking about how it has now affected multiple generations in your family, but maybe not all my listeners know you. So can you tell us a little bit about your congenital heart defect, Victoria, and when it was discovered?
Absolutely. So I have tricuspid atresia, an ASD, VSD, co-arc of the aorta, and I was diagnosed at 1 month old.
So totally different situation compared to Heidi, your niece. And when did you have your first surgery?
I had the repair of the co when I was 1 month old. No, I don't, Mom. Yes, 1 month. And the PA banding at the same time. And the PA, sorry.
That's okay. No, that's okay. You didn't remember. But Mama remembered, right, Rita?
Always.
Yeah. Okay, so Victoria, you were born with it as a baby. Did your heart defect seem like just part of who you were, or did it seem like something alien as you got older and became aware of it?
I think a little bit of both, actually. I just thought that's how I was born, and so this is who I am. But as I got older and could see my friends doing different activities, going off and doing different, maybe more cardiac things, exercising more, then I did notice a difference. But again, this is who I am, and I just know my boundaries and what my body can handle.
Exactly. Rita, let's talk about this girlfriend. I can't believe you and I haven't really had this conversation yet. So I'm interested to hear, first of all, what was it like to have a baby all those decades ago with a congenital heart defect?
I think in some ways it was totally different than it is now, but of course, in other ways, it's exactly the same.
Mhm.
As far as the emotions of what happens when you find out, especially since she was a month old when we found out that she had critical heart defects. So that was different than a lot of people now. They know before the baby's born, which I don't know if that's better or worse.
I know, right? Both you and I had children in a different era, and I didn't know either. I don't know how I would have handled finding out about something this serious. I probably would have been a
Right.
nervous wreck. I'd have been a nervous
Yeah,
wreck. I know
yeah,
I
I'm
would have.
sure.
Yeah. I had 3 ultrasounds, and even though my baby had a single ventricle heart, we saw the heart beating. And remember how grainy those ultrasounds were back then?
I never had an ultrasound because my babies were born before ultrasounds were routine. So I never had one.
Oh my
That was
gosh.
40 years
Okay.
ago almost, come March.
Oh, wow. Okay. See, I didn't realize that. I did have 3 because we couldn't agree on the age of the baby when I thought I got
Uh,
pregnant versus when they thought I got
mhm.
pregnant. And so they kept doing ultrasounds to measure the baby. So here I had 3 ultrasounds, no diagnosis. But I think I'd have been a nervous wreck. But I didn't know because I enjoyed my pregnancy as much as I could, although I had morning sickness throughout the entire pregnancy. Did you notice anything different with Victoria versus your pregnancy with your boys?
No, not really. At the end, of course, I was really uncomfortable. And I worked until the end, school, until the day before she was born. No, I really didn't notice anything different.
Oh, wow. And what month was she born?
March 31st.
March 31st. Oh my gosh. So, yeah, you got a couple
Hmm.
months off in the summer, but
Yeah, so I
otherwise,
was home. I was planning to go back in August, September. And of course, that didn't happen. But yeah, I planned to go back 5 months home, but I got 13 years home instead.
what diagnosis did they give you after you finally did have her heart defect diagnosed? And Victoria said that she wasn't diagnosed until she was a month old. Is that right?
So at 1 month, she was diagnosed. We did not know before she was born. I had taken her to the pediatrician for her second PKU. And at that point, she had lost weight. And so then he did a chest x ray and found out that her heart was enlarged. So the next day, he immediately made an appointment for the pediatric cardiologist. And the next day, we were sent to a town, it's about 30 miles away. And we were given the diagnosis of tricuspid atresia, ASD, VSD, and a coart. He immediately started her on Lasix, made an appointment for us to be at Texas Children's in Houston that night. He actually made our airplane reservations for us.
Oh, wow.
And so yeah, that night we were at Texas Children's and they gave us the exact same diagnosis.
Wow. That must have seemed surreal to you, Rita.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, you'd already raised 2 healthy boys. Did you notice that she was losing weight? Was she hard to feed?
She had become hard to feed where she just turned her head and I was like, this isn't right.
Mhm.
And our oldest had pyloric stenosis and then Victoria had started vomiting. So I was thinking maybe she has it. Not real common in girls, not unheard of. So that was on my mind. Nothing
Mhm.
heart wise for sure.
Yeah. I think if you haven't encountered CHDs, and especially 40 years ago, or even 28 years ago, because my kid's 28,
Mm.
you just didn't think about that. We didn't have the knowledge that we do now. We'll be talking about why we have more of this knowledge more in a minute. But let me go back to you, Heidi. Let's talk about what your first surgery was like for you. You were 18 years old. It must have been really scary to you. You were just getting ready to start your life as an adult post high school, right?
So I had already been in college for a year and I had made the plan to take some of my prereqs again. And it ended up working out in my favor really well. But I was prepping for surgery and it really hit me. My mom actually works at the hospital that I had my surgery at. And originally I was supposed to be at an adult hospital and that terrified me because I'm like, I'm not ready. This is a big surgery. I don't want to go to an adult hospital. And so she actually talked to one of the surgeons at our hospital and he was like, oh, yeah, let me just make a phone call and got it transferred over to Riley.
Oh,
And
wow.
she texted me, she was like, hey, you're having open heart surgery in 6 weeks. And I was babysitting, I was at work, and I was like, I didn't really know what to do. And when I got the diagnosis, I was with my best friend out in California. So every time I got the news of this big event surrounding my heart, I was busy in a way. And
Hmm.
so I just would shove it in my back pocket, move on with my day. And then when I got home, I was just like, wow, so what does this entail? And so my mom and I talked about it. And then I think at that point, that's when I started really talking to Aunt Victoria about what does it look like? Of course, since she had her surgery, she was a lot younger. So it's hard. But I'm like, how did you process it as an adult? And
Yeah.
would ask her all of my questions. And it was really terrifying. But I really didn't lie about it until they were wheeling me back. And that's really when it hit me.
Yeah.
I just felt like a fever dream. And then when I
Yeah.
was getting wheeled back is when I really started to be like, oh, this is happening. And that was
Yeah.
terrifying.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I can only imagine. I can only imagine. But how wonderful for you that you had your mom right there as a nurse. You were in a hospital where you felt more secure and more taken care of. And you had a family who actually understood what it was like to deal with heart surgery. Was that some kind of source of comfort for you?
It was. And my mom's a respiratory therapist. So I was asking her more of the questions about intubation and what is that going to look like for me? And will I wake up with a tube? Because for
Mm.
some reason that scared me waking up being intubated. But I have family that works in the hospital and then I'm pursuing a career in the hospital. And then I have family that's gone through it. And
Mm.
it was comforting to know what the outcome would be, but it was also really terrifying knowing what the outcome could be if something went wrong.
Yeah.
I also was left to my own devices in the sense that like midnight would roll around and I am still awake going, oh my gosh, I'm having open heart surgery in 2 weeks. So here I am sitting on Google. What could happen if? And
Oh,
that
no.
was really scary.
Yes, you don't want to do that. Don't do that, friends. Don't look on Google all the things that could go wrong. 'Cause life is
I did not.
fragile and the human body is complex and lots of things can go wrong, can't they, Heidi?
Yes, and I do not recommend doing that. That was probably one of my not so smart ideas. But as an 18-year-old, and it's really terrifying because at the time I didn't know anybody who had open heart surgery as an adult. So it was really hard to know what it would be like because I know what my life was before a heart condition and I know what
Sure.
life was like as a normal, healthy kid
Mhm.
versus now where I'm a heart kid and I have a little bit more of limitations. And so that was a really hard thing to process and learn to manage.
Absolutely. You called your Aunt Victoria, so let's talk to Victoria now. Victoria, you had surgery at a month old. I know you don't remember that one, but I also know that over the course of your life, you've had more than one procedure. So tell us how many surgeries you have had and which ones you remember.
I had a surgery at 1 month, the PA banding, and then I had the open heart surgery at 6 years old. That was the major one. And then recently, 2 years ago, I had a heart ablation because I was having arrhythmias. When I was younger, I didn't really know what was going on. I remember I asked my mom if I could call my pediatrician, Dr. Tolan, who became a family friend, to make sure I needed to have this surgery.
I love
We
that.
called him. He said yes, but I
Yeah.
did need to have this surgery when I was 6, and you don't process things like you do as an adult. When I had the ablation, it was during COVID, but not at the height of COVID. and my mom couldn't go back. I remember they called me back. I hadn't even said goodbye to my mom. And luckily, I am deathly afraid of needles. So when I screamed bloody murder, they let my mom come back and sit with me until they
Oh.
actually wheeled me. And I will say that was probably one of the scariest coming out of that surgery. I thought I still had my mask on. And I was like, why aren't they taking my mask off? I can't breathe. But I was just coming out of anesthesia.
And you remember that.
So,
You have that memory.
yes. Yeah.
I'm sorry you have that memory because it sounds like that was a really scary experience for you.
And I had some, I guess, some complications. They thought they lost a needle in me. So they were talking to me, and my mom happened to hear, and I'm just like nonchalant because I'm still under anesthesia coming out of it. And my mom, excuse me, what?
So your mom was with you when you had the ablation? She
Yeah,
was actually in the room?
no, not in the room, but when
Oh.
they were done with the procedure. So I don't remember anything about the procedure specifically, other than going back and coming out of it. So, yeah.
Okay. Wow. Rita, you and I have experienced having to hand off an infant to the surgeon and then being present when our young adult, or in Victoria's case, full-fledged adults, are needing surgeries. And I want to talk to you about what the difference was like for you being in the waiting room when your infant was having surgery and then when your child was older.
It's no easier. I think I was a little calmer. I know a whole lot more now about congenital heart and what's being done and how the whole thing goes than I did the very first time.
Mhm.
So it's a little different, but it's still not fun.
No.
Being at her ablation a couple of years ago, it was during COVID. And so I had to be up there by myself. My husband, her dad couldn't come with me because they only allowed one person in. And then they weren't going to let me see her once they called her back. So luckily, as she said, they did call me back and let me sit with her when she got terrified of the needle.
Well, I'm glad you could still be there because we're from Texas. Victoria's originally from Texas, but she had that last surgery in Arizona, right?
Correct. She did. And it was an adult hospital, which made
Mhm.
me nervous because we'd never been in an adult hospital. And she's had 3 catheterizations since the Fontan. So that was different too, not being in a children's hospital. But things worked
Yeah.
out, except for the part where they thought they lost a wire in her arm and told me it could go to her heart. They're trying to tell her what's going on, and she's still out of it from the anesthesia. And then they were trying to kick me out because it's COVID and visiting hours were over. So that part I wasn't too happy about, but ended up they did not lose the wire. They finally figured that out the next day. So all in all, the ablation went well.
For me, Rita, handing an infant over was terrifying because I was just starting to get to know him. And to think of having that baby ripped away from me so young was just unimaginable. But then later, when my baby had surgery as a young adult, there was a personality there. And to know that child might come out and have a stroke or not be the same person, that was in some ways more terrifying because I'd already had 16 years with my heart warrior. And then all of a sudden to think the life that my child knew might be gone forever. Did you have any thoughts like that? Did you have any fears like that?
I think that's a fear that stays with you all the time.
Yeah. Well, Heidi, let's go back to you for a minute because I understand now that you were already in college. I was thinking that you were in high school when that happened. So you were already in college. You were already deciding to study nursing. Is that because your family is very medically oriented? Or was it partly because of your Aunt Victoria? What made you decide to become a nurse?
So I had always had this affinity for helping people. And I remember being little, grandma had gotten me a little vet Barbie playset. And I remember it came with a little kid. And I remember there was like an x ray machine and putting the baby on the x ray machine and playing nurse and doctor with my Barbies. And so I
Aw.
always knew I would eventually go into nursing. My mom is a respiratory therapist. My aunt on my mom's side is a respiratory therapist. So I had the exposure to the medical field, but I never wanted to be a respiratory therapist. I always knew I wanted to be a nurse. So when I got into college, I started pursuing that. And I had started taking physio. And this was before I was diagnosed with the heart problem. And my cousin recently had a heart ablation for, I forget what condition he has, but basically his heart wasn't beating correctly. It would speed up and then slow down very randomly. So he had a heart ablation and then everything with my aunt. And I was like, "Oh, theology seems really cool." And so I started thinking about that. And then 2 months later, I was diagnosed with a heart condition.
Oh, wow. 2 months later, you had discovering you have your own heart problem. So you had never fainted or had any other clues that you might have something wrong with your heart?
I had almost all the telltale signs. It just wasn't connected. When I was a baby, I had RSV and I was third spacing and my heart rate was really high. And I was failure to thrive as an infant. My mom kept taking me to the pediatrician and they were just like, "Oh, she's fine. She's been in 6 month clothing for the last 6 months. She's not fine. She's small." And I had very tall siblings. So there were those signs as a baby. And then as I got older, have cyclical vomiting and abdominal migraines, which can also be related to a heart issue. And so I was diagnosed with that at 17, and I was diagnosed with asthma. I was diagnosed with asthma when I was little and then re-diagnosed when I was 17. And
Wow,
so
that
little
17-year, whatever year that was a rough year for you, wasn't it?
that was 2020. It was prior to COVID, I think, was when I was diagnosed with my GI issues. I even
Yeah.
had an upper GI done in February. So that was right before COVID. And so I had all these puzzle pieces. It just wasn't put together yet. And then when I turned 18, everything made sense. Once I got that
Wow.
diagnosis, everything made sense.
Wow. So are they still saying that you have asthma, or was that a misdiagnosis and it was really your congenital heart defect?
Post surgery, they are saying that I don't have asthma, but also it depends. So, what I recently learned this summer is that adult pulmonologists and children's pulmonologists don't necessarily agree on small airway asthma, which is what I have. And so, my adult pulmonologist says, "No, you don't have asthma. Technically, your small airways aren't functioning at full capacity, but we wouldn't say you have asthma." Whereas if I went to my pulmonologist that I went to when I was 17, they would say, "Yes, you have asthma." So
Oh,
they say
wow.
no.
Okay. So they say no. So do you still have albuterol or something to help open you up when you do feel like you're having an asthma attack?
Yeah, so I do have Adderall, but I only have to use it as needed, which isn't really that often because I more so have trouble with my heart than I do with my lungs. As far as if I exercise, I'm having heart issues, not necessarily respiratory issues.
Mhm.
So I rarely use my inhaler.
Okay, that all makes sense. So, are you changing your major as far as will it now be pediatric cardiology nursing?
I'll just be graduating as a nurse, but I already have my foot in the door for pediatric cardiology. I work at Riley on our cardiovascular unit. So I have my foot in the door.
It seems as though this is God's plan for you, Heidi.
Very much so. Everything worked out really well. I talked to my surgeon and I'm planning to shadow more surgeries this semester. And he helped me get connected with one of our surgeons that does a little more complex surgeries. They both do complex surgeries, but one of them does a lot of our heart transplants. And I'm really interested in seeing that. And my surgeon told me that more so as a joke, but I think deep down, he was serious. He said, after your surgery and after you graduate, if you want to come work for me, you're more than welcome. And at first I was like, yeah, I'm not really interested in surgery. And then I watched the surgery and I've already wanted to go back to be an NP. I want to work and get some experience first and then go back and be an NP. And I was telling him, I was like, yeah, I think I want to be an NP in your OR. And he was like, okay, well, make sure you start shadowing NPs on your free time. And I was like, okay, sounds great.
Okay, so for those of my listeners who may not be familiar with that jargon, NP stands for nurse practitioner. And so she would be an advanced practice nurse working in the operating room. You are brave, Heidi. I don't do well with blood, so I would not be the person you would want in that operating theater. But how awesome is that? Because you would be able to talk to those parents and to those patients with firsthand knowledge, not just book knowledge, but firsthand knowledge and vicarious knowledge, since so many members of your family seem to be affected by congenital heart disease.
Yeah, it's really nice. Even now, I connect to my patients. I'm just a tech, so I'm grabbing vitals and I'm not even like poking my patients or anything. But I go in there and I just recently had a patient who was a little bit older and they were really struggling with adjusting to having surgery. And I was like, hey, I've been through this. And so after that, like we really connected and it was really nice to be a support system for them and be like, I've experienced exactly what you're going through. I know how you feel. That was really nice.
Oh, I'm sure it was so nice for them too to have a nurse who could be not only compassionate, which compassion, of course, is important, but empathy because you had actually experienced it yourself. That's a totally different type of connection to make.
And I just want to add, before Heidi was diagnosed, she was actually a cheerleader. She ran track. She played volleyball for her school. So she was very athletic
Yeah, I also played
before all this.
basketball too.
And basketball. Yeah. So I just find that so interesting.
I can't
that
believe you
she was
passed
able
all
to
your
do all that.
sports. You passed all your sports exams. Did they have you go through a more intense medical examination to be able to play those sports, Heidi?
We just did a physical exam. I was able to keep up with all of my peers and I was fairly good at track and didn't really show signs of struggling. The only thing I would ever complain of was it's really hard to breathe after running my mile, but I just thought that was normal for everyone. And then now looking back, I'm like, yeah, probably because my lungs were flooding a little bit with some blood.
Gosh, to think you ran a mile when you had this small airway. Now you know you have a small airway. It wasn't really asthma, but yes, it must have been so hard to breathe. Maybe it was a blessing that you did long distance running, though, because I imagine that sprinting would have been even harder.
Yeah, I don't know how I made it through, but I did long distance. There were times where I would fill in and do short distance, but I never really liked that just because I didn't think I was that fast. So I was just
Mhm.
like, yeah, I'll stick to my long distance running.
Yeah, where you pace yourself a little bit more. I wonder if you had been a sprinter, if they maybe would have picked up on it, but apparently not. It was God's plan for you to be picked up much later. And this steered your direction in nursing a little bit. I just find it fascinating. And I know, Rita, we've talked before about, is this hereditary? Do we have to worry about our other children? And I remember talking to you about Joey being involved in sports at a high level and me being so afraid that maybe he had an undiagnosed heart defect. And then I took Joey for a higher level medical exam and they actually did an echo on him and me crying when I saw his perfectly shaped heart. Nothing wrong with it. I made it to the car before I burst into tears. And that's when it hit me how much I had really been worrying about him. It must have been tough for you, Rita, because I'm sure you worried about all of your grandchildren. I know I was worried about my first granddaughter having a problem too.
Oh, yeah. We had told their mothers, of course, and they knew that they needed to be checked more just to make sure. But from what I've learned about the PAPVR, it's often not diagnosed until you're an adult or a teen. It's just that kind of defect that just doesn't show up until later. It's always there. It's always been there, but it just doesn't present itself. I don't know if it's because after time, maybe the heart get tired and functioning the way it was.
With PAPVR too, one of the common causes of like it showing its signs in full effect is the heart being in right-sided heart failure. Like when I went to talk to my surgeon, he said if I didn't have surgery in the next few years, I would die in my early 20s because I was so far in right-sided heart failure. My heart was very large. And then another thing is too, a lot of times PVR is found in children, but it's in deceased children, which was it's a really hard pill to swallow to know that I've outlived a lot of people with the same defect because I do a presentation for the human anatomy class at the school I go to. And that was one of the things that I found when I was researching. And it was mind blowing for me.
That would be mind blowing. My granddaughter was diagnosed with a murmur, and it scared me because we know so much more about heart defects. When Rowan was diagnosed with a heart murmur, of course, all these different scenarios played through my mind, and I couldn't say much to Joey or Ashley because I didn't want to scare them. And I was really hoping it would be what's called an innocent murmur and that it would just be a very small hole that would close up on its own. And when she had her 6-month visit, the doctor said he could no longer hear the murmur. So I felt like I could take a deep breath, but I'll be honest with you girls, I still worry that maybe there is something more going on and that she seems fine now, but maybe something could surface later. So I don't know if that fear ever leaves us. Do you think it does, Rita?
No, well, actually, my niece's baby, who's just about 8 months now, she was diagnosed with a heart murmur when she was, I think, about a month old. And they sent her to a cardiologist. And, I worried that something was wrong. But again, they said it was an innocent murmur. And so hopefully.
Yeah, I just can't think about it too much. I just have to hope and pray that everything is okay and that if something surfaces later, like it did with Heidi, that we'll have the medical technology to take care of her. Otherwise, I'd make myself crazy.
Exactly.
This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The opinions expressed in the podcast are not those of Hearts Unite the Globe, but of the hosts and guests, and are intended to spark discussion about issues pertaining to congenital heart disease or bereavement.
You are listening to the CHD podcast. If you have a question or comment that you would like addressed on our show, please send an email to anna@thechdpodcast.com.
Well, this show was going to be about taking control of your heart. And as we all know, who are sitting in this room, control is in God's hands. It's not really in our hands. However, we can take control as far as what Heidi is doing, which is studying to learn more and to take care of her heart the best she can. And what Rita did in raising Victoria to know that this was a lifelong condition and she would have to take care of herself. But Victoria, you did something else that I found so impressive. And you've been on Heart to Heart with Anna to talk about this too. But I wanted to give you a few minutes to talk about the Wear Purple for CHD campaign, because I really felt like that was one way that you were asserting yourself and taking more control of this condition that you were born with. Can you tell us about your campaign, when you started it, and what you're doing this year?
Yeah, so my mom and I haphazardly mentioned CHD needs like a wear purple or wear some color awareness day like women have for heart wear red day. And so we went ahead and did something about that and started the Wear Purple for congenital heart defect. And we do it on Friday before Heart Week. And so this year it's going to be on February 10th. And I just started a Facebook event and I post it every year. We share it in all the Facebook heart groups that we're a part of and share with our friends. And we just ask people to show their support by wearing some sort of purple and posting that picture. And my goal is to spread more awareness. And we often get, why did you choose purple? Because there are several different logos that go around in the CHD community, and some are red and blue. And I chose purple because it's my favorite color. And two, and this is the real reason, when I was born, I was purple. And most CHD babies are a blue or a purple color. And so I just felt like purple was the right color for this event. And we've been doing this for almost 10 years now.
Oh
It's
my
been a while.
gosh. Has it really been that long?
Yeah. Well,
Wow.
I cannot remember exactly what year we started it, but I was not living in Phoenix yet, and I've been here
Right.
8 years. So it has to
Yeah.
be like 10.
Okay, that is amazing to me. Because I remember you and your mom coming on my show early to talk about this.
Absolutely, we did. We wanted to get that awareness out there. Last year, I wrote an article for the CHD magazine to hopefully get more people aware of this day. We do Wear Purple Day the last Friday in Heart Week. We want everyone to post them wearing purple on the event page. My goal is to one day reach some of these celebrities that have been affected by CHD, like Jimmy Kimmel, and get him to hopefully spread more awareness. I know there are other celebrities like Shaun White. So that's my goal, is to hopefully get them to see this and start spreading the awareness. And so we can get this worldwide.
Absolutely. And I'm so proud of Jenny Muscatel for starting the CHD magazine that has given us yet another vehicle to put information out to the world. If you all haven't seen the CHD magazine that Jenny Muscatel is the editor for, it is a beautiful online only magazine. And she does accept all kinds of articles. So last year, when she was getting ready to put out the magazine in February, I said, "Oh, you have to have an article by Victoria." And she was very sweet. I was so excited to see that you had yet another way to put that information out there. So I'm excited that we can put that out on this new podcast. And I've seen lots of people post on Facebook when they're wearing purple. I usually try and take a picture of myself in purple. I wore purple today. Even the producer, Frank Jaworski, wore purple today so that we could be in solidarity for raising awareness of congenital heart defects. I think it's difficult to live with a condition that could take your life. Anybody who's facing chronic illness or facing being born with a condition that can take their life, it can be really scary. But I think that you have to get to a point for your own mental health where you just recognize, okay, this is part of my life going forward, and I can live in fear, or I can try and make a difference. And that's what I see you doing, Heidi. That's what I see you doing, Victoria. And Rita, you and I have been heart sisters moving forward and trying to raise awareness so we can let the world know this is something that is out there, and we all have to do our part if we're going to make this world a little bit better. Love to know how you ladies feel about that.
We do Wear Purple Day the last Friday in Heart Week, and we want everyone to post them wearing purple on the event page.
Perfect. Okay. So, do you guys want to talk just a moment about trying to take control of having CHD in your lives? We'll start with you, Heidi.
Yeah. So one thing for me is just continuing to be active and going and seeing my cardiologist and making sure that if I do have any other symptoms that happen to pop up, I'm on top of it right away. And also, I think one thing that has really worked out in my favor is spreading awareness, just like Aunt Victoria does. I go and speak to my human anatomy class at the school I go to and do a presentation all about CHD and my condition. And I have PowerPoint slides and I talk a lot about it with my friends. A lot of the people that I'm in nursing school with now were like, oh, you should do a presentation in Dr. Yard's class. And I was like, I did. That was me. And it was really funny. I cut my hair. I changed my hair color since then. A lot of them didn't know it was me, but they were like, wow, that was a really cool story. And so that's one way that I like to take control of it. I never let it. I just, since I've had my surgery, I just always told myself I'm never going to be self-conscious about my scar. If somebody looks at me differently, that's on them. This is how I am now. So yeah.
Good for you, Heidi. I love it. We're powerful women and we can do what we can. And that's all we can do. You can't change the fact that you were born with PAVPR and that you had to have open heart surgery any more than Victoria can change the fact that she was born with tricuspid atresia and ASD and COA. So what can you do? You can just make the best of the situation. And Victoria, I'm so proud of you for how you have risen above. You do have a fear of needles. I understand that given everything that you've been through, but you've worked to overcome that. So what has taking control of your CHD meant to you?
Yeah, I'm going to echo what Heidi said. Going to your regularly scheduled appointment with your cardiologist is so key to maintaining where your heart is and to be on top of any heart issues that may arise. I never thought I would wake up one morning and have a heart rate of 240 and
Oh my
then months
gosh.
later have to have an ablation. But because I am in contact with my cardiologist and my cardiologist's office on a regular basis, we were able to get me to the hospital, get me the treatment I needed. And that was in the height of COVID. It was happened to be on my birthday. So in
Oh,
March of 2020. And
wow.
just knowing that I have the support of not only my family, but the cardiologist here because I am away from all of my family. And luckily, my cardiologist is very nice and we are very good friends. And so I just texted her that morning. But again, going back to your question, that keeping your appointments, even when you think that your heart's doing well, you need
Mhm.
those checkups because you
Yeah.
never know when you'll wake up like I did.
And having that rapport.
I just love my current cardiologist.
Aw, that's
So
so
yeah,
neat. I love it. You hang around long enough. It's amazing how many people you get to know. And the CHD community is fluid. They do move from city to city, which was one of the scary things for Rita and me when our kids were young was that we didn't want those cardiologists to move someplace else, did we, Rita?
no, we didn't. And actually, Victoria's cardiologist in Houston was Dr. Charles Mullins, and he was there. She saw him on the day that she was his last appointment. And she
Aw.
was already in college. So she had him all the way from the time she was diagnosed until she was actually in grad school, I think. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Anna Jaworski has written several books to empower the congenital heart defect or CHD community. These books can be found at Amazon.com or at her website, www.babyheartspress.com. Her bestseller is The Heart of a Mother, an anthology of stories written by women for women in the CHD community. Anna's other books, My Brother Needs an Operation, The Heart of a Father, and Hypoplastic Left Heart Syndrome, a handbook for parents, will help you understand that you are not alone. Visit babyheartspress.com to find out more.
Let's conclude this show by talking about what it's meant to you to watch Victoria grow up and take control of her health care and to watch Heidi be such a strong advocate for herself with her heart condition.
They're strong women, as you said. They definitely are. They've chosen the medical field.
Yeah. Yeah. I expected my kids to both go into medicine, and my heart warrior is a pharmacy tech.
Yeah.
So I think maybe with them being in the hospitals as much as they are, it's almost like a home away from home. But I love it that they are all service related. They're all giving back to the community. It just makes me so proud.
And Victoria's with the VA, Veterans Administration, and I know that her grandfather and her brother, both veterans, that was part of the reason she headed that direction.
I love that. I just love it. Ladies, this has been such a joy to get a chance to talk to all three of you together. I never would have predicted something like this would happen. Thank you, Heidi, for coming on the second episode of my brand new podcast.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Heidi. I'm so happy to meet you. Finally, I said prayers for you. So many people in the heart community said prayers for you. And I'm just so thankful that you're doing well. And it's just been lovely to see you.
Yeah, you too.
Okay, Victoria. I don't know how many shows we've done together. It's always delightful to talk to you, Victoria.
Always a delight, Anna. I love this. I love spreading awareness. And I think what you're doing is absolutely amazing as well.
Oh, thank you, sweetie. And Rita, it's always wonderful to talk to you. I feel like you and I were cut from the same cloth.
I agree, Anna. And thank you for having us on again.
I love you, my friend. And I thank you for always being supportive. You're the one person, one of the few people that I can always turn to who I know is going to be like, sure, I'll help out. And I don't take that for granted. I really do appreciate it.
Appreciate you too. And love you back.
It's lovely. We have this like mutual admiration society going on here. And thanks to my producer, Frank Jaworski, today. I really appreciate you as well. Friends, Camiecia Anthony is a 38-year-old tetralogy of survivor. She's very lucky that she was also born with a VSD. This is something you'll learn more about when I have a chance to interview Camiecia's mother. Camiecia has two heart-healthy children, Jay and Nyla, and she's expecting another bundle of joy this year. Camiecia works full-time as an administrative support specialist in the school system. When she's not working or running around for her kids, she can be found volunteering for the Adult Congenital Heart Association, the Connecticut Children's Medical Center for their adult patients, or other organizations throughout Connecticut and Massachusetts. I feel very blessed indeed that Camiecia is with me today, so let's get right to the final segment of the show. Camiecia, what did you think about today's program?
I absolutely loved today's program, and I thought that it was very inspiring to see that an adult can be diagnosed with a congenital heart defect. Here I am thinking at 30 years old that it was only babies that were diagnosed. So to find out that you can be diagnosed as an adult was really surprising and also interesting.
Right. Most of the episodes of Heart to Heart with Anna that I've done have always had people who were identified as children. I have
Correct.
had a few where people weren't identified until they were adults, but most of those were in the cardiac athlete series that I did. So, yeah, this was a bit of a surprise to me too, especially since I knew that Rita was very hyper aware that congenital heart defects could happen in the family. And I know the kids were checked out at least, to a certain degree when they were
Right.
little. Yeah. I was really surprised when Rita announced that Heidi had a heart condition and kind of threw all of us who know the Scoggins family into a tailspin. We couldn't believe it. We thought that all the kids were okay. So what surprised you most about the episode, Camiecia?
I think for me, it was not surprising, but I found it relieving that she grew up with this congenital heart and not knowing that she had it. And then when she did find out that she had it, she didn't let it change who she was. So I found that inspiring. I know me knowing that I had it since I was little and growing up with it, my mom never made me feel different. But me personally, I would always look at other people and be like, well, you don't have a scar. She doesn't have a scar. So I felt like that kind of set me apart. So for her to just not let it change her, I thought that was mind blowing. Because again, for me, knowing I had it all my life, I felt like that had a little bit of an impact on who I was. But here she is, and she didn't know, and it never changed her.
Well, thank you so much for producing this show, Camiecia. And thank you one more time, Heidi, Victoria, and Rita Scoggins, and of course, all of you, our listeners.
Thank you for joining us today on the CHD podcast. Stay tuned for more shows coming in the months ahead.